I invite our next speaker, so Mathieu Thomas, who will address the issue of, the role of actors and how does it impact the use of biodiversity. So Mathieu, yes, you can share your screen. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. Is it okay? Could you hear me?
Yes, we see the slide and we hear you. Well, our speaker in the room is a bit fuzzy, but well, it is not your responsibility.
Okay. Okay, so thank you, Michel. Thank you for the invitation. And so I'm Mathieu Thomas from Cirad. I belong to the AGAP Institute research unit, working on genetic adaptation and plant breeding. And I'm a member of the team Dynamic of the Diversity, Society and Environment. And I'm a population geneticist and working now more at the crossroad between population genetics and also sociology or sociology of the organization, with the help of Salim Louafi, colleagues of the same teams, who is a researcher in science policy, and Hélène Joly, researcher in population genetics too. And this presentation is in the frame of 3 projects, actually. The COEX project, which is the Agropolis Foundation project that finished this year. Diversity project, which is a European project. And TIADIV, a small final project, again, with funded by the Agropolis Foundation. So, yes, the presentation is, I would say, sorry. I would like to introduce my presentation, recognizing that actually when we are speaking about agroecological transition, we mainly focus on the discipline aspect of this agroecological transition. So mainly the way to integrate agronomy and ecology concept. And this is probably not enough. And we have this review and this work done by Vezel and colleagues since several years that recognize that actually agroecological transition rely on 3 dimensions: this discipline, but also practices, so more at the individual level, which is the technical steps during the growing season, but also collective action that can be organized among farmers. And the 3rd dimension is a movement where people, so a social movement, where people demanding for a more sustainable form of agriculture and food systems. And considering this more complex approach of the agroecological transition, we can start to think what could be our contribution as researcher in this more complex picture. And basically, as geneticists and people interested in the management of crop diversity management, we have this reflex to say that in this context of ecological transition, we should think how to mobilize and screen plant genetic resources for agriculture and food and agriculture to inject diversity into breeding programs. So it's in the same frame than the diversification approach introduced by Damien just before. But we think that it's probably not enough, and we can think broadly, particularly considering the discipline. It seems important to work more on the different interactions that are mobilized when we consider agroecosystem with in all its complex dimensions. So in particularly integrate the interplot spatial and temporal diversification and their interaction, like plant-plant interaction, but also with environment management and also considering the social aspect. So the particularity of some farmers community depending the region in the world. But we can also think as researchers to think how we could work differently and particularly collectively and foster interdisciplinary collaborative research and citizen science in this context. And the last axis is to work on the modalities of collaboration between researchers and various disciplines and actors, farmers, but more generally actors involved in these movements. And why to do this is to try to develop continuous interactions and enrichments for designing and implement breeding programs in this context of agroecology and breeding programs in the broad approach. According to this short introduction, in the context of plant genetic resources, it's important to remind that since 2016, there is a recognition in France that a diversity of factors are involved in the management of crop diversity. So basically, we have this ex situ management, mainly managed by academics and gene bank curators, but there is also this in-farm, in-situ, on-farm conservation, which is which involve a more diversity of actors, so researchers, but also civil society, farmers, and other stakeholders. And both approach are involved in this management of crop diversity. And another way to represent this is to say that we have a diversity of actors involved in this management, and I try to give a picture of who are these actors, and it's not exhaustive ecosystem of actors, but you can see some of them. And the question that we can ask is how could we collaborate together? So how to collaborate this diversity of factors. And we think that there is research responsibility to foster collaboration between these actors. And the way to answer this question and to work on this issue was to develop an interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary project involving research colleagues in France, but also in West Africa, and also farmers' organization and NGOs, both also in France and in West Africa, and trying to think how we could work together. And I'm going to show you three different approaches. The first one is more conceptual one, because the need was to develop a conceptual framework that which is adapted to this context of diversity of factors. And for this, we propose to rely on the Elinor Ostrom framework on the common, with these three pillars between actors, crop diversity, actors, resource, and norms. And in our context, we consider that actors are the diversity of actors that are recognized to be involved in management. So it's the ecosystem introduced previously. The resource in this context, we propose that are crop diversity. The idea to use this expression is to integrate genetic resources and seeds as the same things, because considering the stakeholders is not, they don't use the same vocabulary, so we try to develop a common one. And the last one, the arrangement, it's more a call to take a step aside by relying on the concept of the common. Because actually, each actor is involved in his own institutions, and so they develop their own norms and rules to work together, but within their institution. So if we want to work together, we need to design new arrangements, and for this we need to develop something new. But I'm go further on this last point further in the presentation. The second activity was to work with was to create spaces for reflexivity and the modality of collaboration. And these activities relied on the organization of 3 workshops prepared and conducted in pairs between researchers and farmers' organization. We also set up a survey among farmers' organizations in France, Senegal, and Niger to have their feedbacks about their collaboration in the past. And this material was used to elaborate a practical guide to collaborate between researchers and farmers who could develop. Sorry, I'm reading. So we elaborate a practical guide, and this guide was actually so a guide about the collaborative practice between researchers and farmers, and this guide was co-developed by the participants of the workshop. So it's important for us to mention that it's a collective work that helped us to obtain to produce this manual. And the third and last activity that I would like to introduce today is the creation of space for collective experimentation to revisit the role and governance of the gene banks. So this relying on the observation again that working with a diversity of actors is not easy and need a particular work. And this kind of work is not like a classical experimentation with a controlled design and so on. We need to work together and decide and identify which are the lock-in and the lever and progress together in the along the process. So basically, it's a multi-actor process, and for pragmatic reason, we decided to work on the triptych gene banks, research, and civil society organization. So we decided to not work directly with the farm seed company, as we identified that it's something complicated to work with the civil society organization. So the idea was, okay, researchers already work with gene bank and seed companies, but there is a lack of collaboration between research, gene bank, and civil society organization. That's why we make the focus on this. And the participants of this process come from France and Europe, but also from West Africa. So thanks to the COEX project, and in Europe, thanks to the Dynaversity project, who work on the link between in situ and ex situ conservation. So you can see the diversity of actors involved in this process, and I would like to show you the different steps of the process and the knowledge that we accumulate along this. So we start this in 2019 with a practical workshop mobilizing anticipation methods to help that the diversity of factors think project in the future. Based on this first workshop, we organized a second workshop based on the KCP methods, which is based on the knowledge, conception, and practice, a method dedicated for multi-actors conception and this two workshops help to share a diagnosis among these actors and raise the idea, help to raise idea for innovative collaboration. This two workshop was also the opportunity to prepare a roadmap for the next steps. And this roadmap was organized in 3 pillars. The first one was to increase the internal knowledge among the diversity of actors, to develop new rules of governance, and to start to think about what kind of collaborative research program we could work together, develop together. So from October 2012, we start the cross visit to reach the first objective, the objective of the first pillar, the inter-knowledge. And the idea was to organize a cross visit between gene banks, so the gene bank from Avignon, Research Biological Center of Avignon, and Jardin Envie, which are small-scale seed producer mainly for vegetables, just to fostering discussion between, again, these 3 kind of actors: farmers, so civil society, gene banks manager, and researcher. And this cross visit helped to consider the reality, the material reality of each of these actors, to share experience and the multiplication techniques, and so recognize that both actors do the same job, actually, but not in the same context, and reinforce the interest in going further together. Then we continue, so I did not mention that, but of course we were impacted by the sanitary situation, like everybody. So we have to mix between face-to-face meetings and online meetings. And early in 2021, we organized a series of webinars to work on this, so restitution on the cross visit, but also to work on the framework of the commons, which seems really important for everybody since the beginning, and also to work on another concept, which is the third place concept. Saying that, recognizing that this third place concept, it could be inspiring experience for us. So third place is something quite close to the concept of living lab, also in the research context. So in this context, we are also working in a research context, so that could be, say, also living lab. But the main point of the third place is, again, to develop a dedicated governance, so to define new rules to work together. And we continue in the 2021 a second cross visit between the Biological Research Center, Arcade in Montpellier, and a farm in Lodevois, so not so far from Montpellier, where so a community seed bank was organized there, mainly also on vegetables. And this second cross visit helped us to, again, consider the material realities, continue to sharing experience about multiplication techniques, and again, with a clear interest to continue to work together, and in particularly concretely. I mean, technicians that are also involved in this in process say that, okay, it's interesting to do this cross visit, 2 days cross visit, but we need to share more in depth about our practice, and we need, I don't know, training courses, 1 week training or 2 week training courses from each side to better understand each other. So it's quite interesting outcome from this workshop. And the last point I would like to mention that again, in terms of governance of the group, we start to setting a steering committee since June 2021, and which aim to be representative. So for now, the bank manager was not represented, but in the next steps, or we organized a new one recently, and it's the case. So the idea was that the 3 types of actors are represented in this steering committee to orient the group with the different sensitivity in place. And so the next steps now are to continue the cross visit. So we have the next one hopefully in December in Hautes-Alpes. And we are going to visit a community seed bank called Graines de Montagne, and a national conservatory of alpine plant at Gap. And the idea in 2022, we plan to organize a workshop on the 3rd place issue. And in conclusion, and perspective in this process, about this process, is we are thinking more like a multi-sited 3rd place rather than 1 place 3rd place, only 1 location 3rd place. We are involved in research action on. We are starting to be involved in research action on a problem anchor in a territory, and we are now dealing with governance, local seed multiplication issues related with this territory, and that's why we need also to work with a diversity of discipline, like geneticists, but not only, also research in policy science and ethnology, anthropology, sociologists, and so on. And our last ambition is also to work following this approach also in West Africa, because we also involve at the beginning colleagues from North Africa and West Africa, as you maybe saw in my previous slide. And this is a big ambition to develop such approach, but we are still motivated to do it. So just to conclude, and in terms of take-home message, I think it's important to mention that agroecological transition relies on a diversity of actors, and because there is a diversity of actors, that needs collaboration between them, and this collaboration is not self-evident, and that needs time to learn to work together, and that also need to develop new forms of experimentation in this context. So more social experimentation, but social and collective experimentation with this diversity of actors. And the last point is we think that we have altogether the responsibility to open up to a new multi-actor governance better adapted to work together. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mathieu. Do we have some questions in the room? Not yet. So I will start. I have several, so I don't know by which one I will start. Maybe I have one very practical, ground level, I would say, about the 3rd place, and the fact that it seems to me that it takes time. And what I can see from the feedback of our BRCs so our gene banks in RARe, people are always overloaded. At least what I did not visit all of them, but I always hear that when we ask something more for the infrastructure, the answer is very often, oh yes, it would be interesting, but I do not have time. So how can, does it mean that we need to have some new roles like mediator or some facilitator? But then facilitator for several gene banks, not only each one, because then it would be one person for each gene bank. I think maybe it's not efficient. So how can you can you help, or can we help the BRCs to participate in these third places? Because here you had a project, so I think the two gene banks were motivated, they were partners. But if we think it should be in the everyday life of a gene bank, how could we help them to participate in these third places?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Michel. You're right. People don't have time. It's always a problem, but it's even more the problem for the farmers actually. So nobody has time, and the only thing that works it's because they find something new in the way to be together. So there is this curiosity to learn by other. And I think it's important to have this in mind, because they realize that I have some feedback. It's not easy to. Yeah, and the way to be open, the way to have the opportunity to open to other practices, help them to decide it or to be involved in this kind of process actually. And they also see some perspective for the future, because they also realize that the way to work in biological resource center, the means are limited, and they see this new collaboration like opportunity for the future, maybe also to work together, and also to decentralize maybe some activities within the gene bank themselves. So they see new opportunities for collaboration and more technical collaboration for the future. But right now, it's really important to consider how to work together, and in the sense what are the values, and in which direction and from where we come from. But there is I think a lot of expectation for the future based on this collective experimentation.
Thank you. And another question is whether this method of collaboration may differ between countries, at least, for instance, in the European level. If we want to set up a network with the gene banks from other countries, probably, well, maybe we don't know how they organize their contacts with farmers. But do you think there could be cultural differences, or did you observe some trend on this?
You mean at the European scale, or also broadly?
How to manage a third place? Can it depend on the country, the way to manage the third place, to organize it and to benefit from it?
Yeah, for sure. But the ambition here is also to work from the beginning. So not exactly from the beginning, because we have several steps without our African partners. But actually, during the next cross visit, they will be there. And the idea is to develop governance rules that are already adapted for this broad situation. So the idea is that everybody participating to this collective explain their needs and their frustration and so on to be sure that we are developing the good way to work together and integrating this different culture from the beginning, actually, and not waiting, not thinking that we can apply then this model to other contexts. And for sure, in Europe, there is also other way to organize the collaboration with this diversity of factors. The main, from my knowledge, the main example is at CGN. So I know that you have the director of the CGN who are take part of the scientific committee of the infrastructure, and they are well advanced in this following this approach, but more like advisory committee. I would say, they are not directly involved in the decision, or it's something that was developed within the governance of the gene bank, actually. And this is something that we realize that should be changed if we want to obtain the adoption, not the adoption, but the agreement of the diversity of actors that we would like to involve.
Thank you. So if I understand well, we can expect the guidelines next year that we could study for our infrastructure to set up maybe an action plan within the infrastructure to facilitate these third places, because I must say very often we don't know how to start. So if there is a guideline, of course it will help.
Yeah, but again, the guideline is something that seems a bit difficult to. I'm not completely convinced that should be the tools to be efficient in such a context, because people are different, and it depends the kind of actor that are working around each biological resource center. So it's not like I don't know what you are in mind saying guidelines, but if it's something like good practices, I'm not sure that it's a good approach. It's maybe something like that we already start to work on this kind of manual of is more based on advice or points to be where we need to make to have attention, to pay attention on, but there is no general rules actually for this kind of process, I would say.
But I was thinking more of a set of key questions that we need to formalize before starting, because if we don't understand the questions, we will not succeed in discussing anyway. So like a checklist, maybe not guidelines. We should how to define the public, or what do we expect, or what we can do or we cannot do. Because at least in the animal pillar of RARe, we have a stakeholder committee, and we try to define questions of common interest for different farm animal species. But finally, I think it was a mistake, because they are not so much interested, pig people are not so much interested by questions in dairy cattle or in horses. So, but then we don't have time to have a bilateral discussion just for one species. So that's why we were a bit lacking a method, I must say, or how to improve the way. And actually, we found the best feedback we had with them when we had an online survey on ethical questions. Then, of course, everyone was motivated, because ethical approaches, it is interesting for all species. So maybe it was the problem that we had difficulties in identifying the good questions. So that's why. But at least if you can have a sort of a checklist or case studies to give examples, what can work, it could be useful, I think, for all our gene banks.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you, Mathieu. And I thank you for this talk, and we're looking forward to the conclusion of the project. Oui, je vois. Mais Hélène, c'est pas elle qui parle là maintenant. So now we are welcoming Dirk.
Non, c'est une question d'Hélène.
Ah ben oui, mais là il est parti. Hein.
Non, toujours.
Non, je suis là.
Have questions, Hélène? Because je l'ai pas vu maintenant.
Thank you, Michelle.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mathieu, for the presentation. I had a question. You mentioned a need for a common language between the participants and this complicated stakeholder group. And I wondered what the desire for the language was, whether it's perhaps experimentation or just to query the data, or simply the shared understanding with these complex actors.
All together, actually. The simple answer is all together, and that's why that takes times, and that needs to identify, and at each step we think what we could improve in this field. I mean, we need to. So it's a question of common language, but also a question of people need to improve trust among them, and so it was important, for instance, for the farmers who are a big defiance for the research, to say, okay, we need to speak about the value that we reach with us when we work together. And so it's not a question of language, but also a question of value and trust, actually.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Hélène and Mathieu.